Hey everybody, Cody Menz here. I have a video for you about the Tier 8 Russian premium heavy tank, the Udarniy, which currently is already out on the Asian server and Australian server, and at some point will be coming out, I'm assuming, on the NA EU servers and the rest of the PC servers. Now this tank, being a Tier 8 Russian premium heavy, we've got lots of these, so is this tank actually worth purchasing or trying to get, say if it's in a special event, when it actually comes out on your server, you can actually play it. And, how does the tank play? Is it good? A lot of people have a ton of Russian heavies already. So, like, is it really worth getting another one? Now, this tank, it has a lot of going for it. As you see, pike nose design, it's actually got the inverted V-shape hole as well. So it's like pushing a bunch of different Russian designs together, and especially at tier 8, it has a lot going for it. It still feels like other Russian tanks though, which is kind of the biggest, I guess, knock against the tank, in that it does have a lot of pros, but if you already have, say a bunch of tier 8 Russian, heavies, whether it's premium, tech tree tanks, tier 9s, stuff like that, alongside of it, like this tank, it feels at home. And, while this tank I do think is going to perform pretty well, is it really worth going out of your way to get another one? We'll see. Before we get into things though, so we'll do a quick little comparison, but also to start off with the most interesting thing about the tank though. So the armor. This tank is going to troll the ever-living hell out of new players and tier 6s, tier 7s, because you can't actually pen it unless you hit it this very small little diamond shape here. You do have, some pretty large size cupolas though. Like this one's kind of tiny, but this one's pretty weak, 120 millimeters in some spots, and it's pretty big. But otherwise, you're going to have people trying to shoot it down here, and there's nothing to damage. It's going to be very frustrating, and especially for new players and like people that are unaware, you're not doing anything. If you're shooting this, you're just hitting the track. So it is definitely has that in its favor until more people figure that out. So hopefully if you come across this thing, so this is against 250 millimeters here. So it's using AP, and then this is, against heat. But with that kind of V, shape hole and the pike shape, this is heavily angled. The thing's all over the place to where this thing's going to really troll people. It's like driving a 257, around, except for, I feel like this thing is tinier and, harder to hit. And, now you're moving it down to tier 8. So that's, kind of the best thing going for this tank is the armor design. It's pretty compact too. Now getting into the comparison here, I just threw it against some other Russian, tier 8 heavies. You have the Object 252U, IS-3, 703 version 2, and the Kirovets 1. Now, this has the same gun essentially, not the double barrel on the 703-2 as the Kirovets. However, when you start getting into it, so damage and base pen is the same. This does have 285 millimeters on the heat round, 820 shell velocity. But say if you pop over to the 703 version 2, 270 millimeters. So it does have more penetration on the heat round than the 703 version 2 and the Kirovets 1. So it's got that going for it. Otherwise, it has a little bit less base pen than the 252U and IS-3. Now, not great gun depression, but 6 degrees is pretty workable. It's better than a few of the other tanks here. Pretty long aiming time, but best, out of these comparable tanks. And, typical Russian fashion, 0.4 accuracy, pretty bad, but only the Tech Tree IS-3 beats it out here. Now, your DPM is higher, than these tanks here in a comparison. Kind of surprising, so this tank does dish out quite a bit more damage, DPM-wise. Like, only the 703 version 2 is keeping up with it. Although that tank a little bit different here. I feel like when you're factoring in DPM and stuff, because it does have those 2 shots going for it. So something to keep in mind that this does have a little bit more oomph behind the gun. So a little bit higher heat pen, and then a little bit better reload, giving you more DPM. You do have 1600 HP, so going alongside of that really trolley armor, you have that really, yeah, not huge advantage over all these tanks, but you have a pretty good advantage having that going for you, having extra HP, whereas usually it's the flip side where you have a little bit less HP if you have a really good trolley armor scheme like this. We already went over to armor. So it does have a little bit longer suspension repair time. Wargaming probably factoring that in, that there are a lot of tracks but people are going to be shooting thinking that they're hitting the lower glacis, but they're hitting the track. So I guess they factored that in a little bit. Now this tank with mobility, so 45 kilometers an hour, it's pretty freaking fast. Unless Google Translate failed me, Udarniy means shock in Russian, where, you know, this thing is pretty speedy. The terrain resistance isn't terrible. It's not the best though out of these. Like the 703 version 2 is really good values, but it's also not terribly awful for a heavy tank. Same goes with the on the move accuracy. It's similar to a lot of these tanks. It's closest to the Defender, so it's not that great on the move accuracy wise, but this is kind of a breakthrough, you know, pushing fast heavy. Hopefully your armor starts bouncing everything everywhere because everyone's panicking because they can't freaking pen you. Yeah, it seems kind of for that role. Reverse speed, a little bit low though, 12 kilometers an hour. Who needs a reverse when all the little tier 6 and 7 tanks can't pen you? So that's a bit of a negative there. And traverse speed, a little bit low too, you know, for a tank that goes pretty fast forward, you know, compared to these, it doesn't traverse that well. Camouflage, nothing crazy, you know, it's not great, but it is the worst out of these. And then your V-range 360 is not too bad, considering that there are some lower ones here. Overall, though, like, is this tank, you know, worth getting? You know, it does have a decent, you know, crew setup. You know, it's not like a super tiny crew like the IS-3 A that you can't use for anything. And overall, like, you know, the tank looks a bit more modern, you know, than some other Russian tier 8 heavies. And it kind of takes, you know, a little bit from, I guess, like existing Russian heavies and kind of pushes it all together. Like the historical reference, you know, if you can even trust that at this point, is saying basically, I guess like it's comparing it to the Object 257, IS-7, which feels, you know, pretty right when it comes to like the stats here. So it was saying it has enhanced armor, a different engine, and I guess a different transmission. But in any event, though, this tank overall is going to be a pretty good performer. Is it really worth going out of your way to get it? Where, you know, the number one thing going for this compared to the other tanks, you know, we saw in the comparison is that armor scheme at tier 8. You know, I feel like that's worth it, you know, to where you are still going to, you know, are you going to be able to trust that against like experienced players, you know, higher tiers, you know, that have higher pen, especially like higher heat pen and stuff? Not really, but like you still do have a decent gun. You know, it hits pretty hard. You know, mobile platform, you know, you have the bouncy armor to where even experienced players will screw up sometimes because you can kind of, you know, move around in this armor and make it hard to land your shot, to where I feel like this tank's going to be pretty darn good. It's not going to be game breaking. However, the main thing that worries me is definitely only being able to penetrate it in this one little spot here in a lower glacis. People are not going to get that unless they have the enhanced silhouette, you know, turned on, which is really helpful. Hopefully everybody does that and aren't stubborn and leave that off. So that's one good thing that a lot of people probably won't bring up, you know, that Wargaming does have that system in place that will show players that actually have it set up that way, that they can't pen that. But can you actually hit that little lower glacis all the time? It's another story. But overall, though, this tank, good performer, decent crew setup. You know, I think it's going to be a fun tank to play. But really, do you need another Russian premium heavy? That's the main question you have to ask yourself. But if you like, you know, playing Russian heavies, this will be a pretty solid tank to get. And hopefully if you don't get it, then you know at least how to kill it a little bit better with this video. Thanks for watching, and yeah, I'll see you next time. Have a good one.